I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual masters, by whose mercy one makes progress in spiritual life and ultimately attains love of Godhead. Such help along the way is very wonderful. So, all I really want to do now for the next little while is just become absorbed in hearing and chanting. Now, although I say for the next little while, it's going to get more intense from here on out, because once you get a taste of what happens when you hear and chant about the pastimes of the Lord and the Lord's associates and pure devotees, once you get even a tiny drop of a taste of that, you want more. And you lose interest in other things. Perform the activities of life as they need to be performed, maintaining oneself, eating, sleeping, relationships with others who are not particularly interested in love of God, and yet you have to have dealings with them for whatever reason, is all done very matter-of-factly and just according to what needs to be done. But the heart and the desire, I'd heard it described before in different ways, that like if you're in love with someone, all you do is think about them. That's all you. When are you going to meet them again? When are you going to see them again? When are you going to be with them again and experience all the wonderful things you experience when you're with someone that you love very deeply? So that's what happens in spiritual life in relationship to God. And that's what has to happen in order to go back home, back to Godhead. And when we get even just a teeny tiny drop of a taste of that, we want more. And we relish the association of other devotees who are also getting some taste of love of God, devotional service to the Lord. So, it's found in the scriptures. So this is the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, and reading chapter 28. Purāṇa becomes a woman in the next life. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vāsadevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vāsadevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vāsadevaya. The great sage Narada continued, my dear King Prachinabharisai, afterward, the king of the Yavanas, whose name is fear itself, as well as Prajvara, Kalakanya, and his soldiers, began to travel all over the world. Once the dangerous soldiers attacked the city of Purāṇa with great force. Although the city was full of paraphernalia for sense gratification, it was being protected by the old serpent. So previously, in the previous chapter, this was explained. This is an analogy. It's a story, and there's a lot of symbolism in it. Purāṇa he's like a fictional character which depicts pretty much every person. And this allegory is being told by the sage Narada Muni to King Prachinabarhisat for the benefit of Prachinabarhisat, so he can, in an objective way, look at his own situation by hearing about this fictional character, Purāṇa. So what's being said here is that the king of the Yavanas, who is, oh my goodness, I can't remember who he represents. It's explained here. King of the Yavanas. He explained in a previous verse, the king of the Yavanas, whose name was Bhaya, or fear. So the king of the Yavanas is fear. And Prajvara is his brother. And Kalakanya and his soldiers began to travel all over the world. And they attacked Purāṇa, the city of Purāṇa, with great force. Now this is like his body. It's compared to his body. And the queen of the city, his consort, was his intelligence. And they're all like personifications for the story, to illustrate in a personal way, not a mechanical way, but in a spiritual way, how these components interact. So, although the city was full of paraphernalia for sense gratification, it was protected by the old serpent. So the old serpent was described as the life heirs. Gradually, Kalakanya, with the help of dangerous soldiers, attacked all the inhabitants of Purāṇa's city and thus rendered them useless for all purposes. So this is the time of death coming for Purāṇa. He's being shut down. His body is being shut down. When Kalakanya, daughter of time, attacked the body, the dangerous soldiers of the king of the Yavanas entered the city through different gates. So the daughter of time is attacking the body of King Purāṇa, and the soldiers of fear are entering the city through the different gates. Now the gates are the different openings of the body, the eyes, the nose, the ears, the tongue, like this. So the senses, he's experiencing fear sensually, and they begin to give severe trouble to all the citizens. When the city was thus endangered by the soldiers and Kalakanya, King Purāṇa, being overly absorbed in affection for his family, was placed in difficulty by attack of the Yavana Raj and Kalakanya. When King Purāṇa was embraced by Kalakanya, he gradually lost all his beauty. Having been too much, I believe Kalakanya, the daughter of time, is also old age personified. Yes, she's old age personified. So when King Purāṇa was embraced by Kalakanya, old age, he gradually lost all his beauty. Having been too much addicted to sex, he became very poor in intelligence and lost all his opulence. Being bereft of all possessions, he was conquered forcibly by the Gandharvas and the Yavanas. Now, Gandharva here is also used as delusionary things. So he was conquered by delusion and fear. King Puranjana then saw that everything in his town was scattered and that his sons, grandsons, servants, and ministers were all gradually opposing him. He also noticed that his wife was becoming cold and indifferent. So it was explained his wife was actually his intelligence. Intelligence becoming cold and indifferent. When King Puranjana saw that all his family members, relatives, followers, servants, secretaries, and everyone else had turned against him, he became very anxious, but he could not counteract the situation because he was thoroughly overwhelmed by kalakanya, old age. So when a person, a man specifically, who is usually in charge of a family and a household, usually he's embarrassed by old age and invalidity, and he can't keep supplying everything to all his family members, then they actually turn against him. And that's what's happening here. And then he's in anxiety. The objects of enjoyment became stale by the influence of kalakanya, old age. Due to the continuance of his lusty desires, King Puranjana became very poor in everything. Thus he did not understand the aim of life. He was still very affectionate toward his wife and children, and he worried about maintaining them. That's all he knows, is his bodily relations. The city of King Puranjana was overcome by the Gandharva and Yavana soldiers, and although the king had no desire to leave the city, he was circumstantially forced to do so, for it was smashed by kalakanya. Under the circumstances, the elder brother of Yavanaraj, known as Prajvar, set fire to the city to please his younger brother, whose other name is fear itself. So the purport here by Prabhupada: according to the Vedic system, a dead body is set on fire, but before death, there is another fire, or fever, which is called Prajvar, or Vishnujvar. Medical science verifies that when one's temperature is raised to 107 degrees, a man immediately dies. This Prajvar, or high fever, at the last stage of life, places the living entity in the midst of a blazing fire. Next verse. When the city was set ablaze, all the citizens and servants of the king, as well as all family members, sons, grandsons, wives, and other relatives, were within the fire. King Puranjana thus became very unhappy. So these family members, in the purport Prabhupada explains, are the different parts of the body. So the purport is, there are many parts of the body: the senses, the limbs, the skin, muscles, blood, marrow, and all these are considered here figuratively as sons, grandsons, citizens, and dependents. When the body is attacked by Vishnujvar, the fiery condition becomes so acute, sometimes one remains in a coma. This means the body is in such severe pain, one becomes unconscious, cannot feel the miseries taking place within the body. Indeed, the living entity becomes so helpless at the time of death that, although unwilling, he is forced to give up the body and enter another. The city's superintendent of police, the serpent, saw the citizens were being attacked by kalakanya and became very aggrieved to see his own residence set ablaze after being attacked by the Yavanas. As a serpent living within the cavity of a tree wishes to leave when there is a forest fire, so the city's police superintendent, the snake, wished to leave the city due to the fire's severe heat. The purport is interesting. It's a short purport. It becomes very difficult for snakes to leave a forest when there is a fire. Other animals may flee due to their long legs, but serpents, only being able to crawl, are generally burnt in the fire. At the last stage, the limbs of the body are not as much affected as the life air, which is compared here to the snake. The limbs of the serpent's body were slackened by the Gandharvas and Yavana soldiers who had thoroughly defeated his bodily strength. When he attempted to leave the body, he was checked by his enemies. Being thus baffled in his attempt, he began to cry loudly. At the last stage of life, the different gates of the body are choked by the effects of disease, which are caused by an imbalance of bile, mucus, and air. The living entity cannot clearly express his difficulties, and surrounding relatives hear the sound from a dying man. In his Mukundamala Stota, King Kulashekar states, "My dear Krishna, please help me die immediately, so that the swan of my mind may be encircled by the stem of your lotus feet. Otherwise, at the time of my final breath, my throat is choked up. How will it be possible for me to think of you?" Those who are strong in Krishna consciousness cannot possibly forget Krishna at any stage, because they are accustomed to chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, especially when there is a signal from death. King Puranjana then began to think of his daughters, sons, grandsons, daughter-in-law, sons-in-law, servants, and other associates, as well as his house, his household paraphernalia, and his little accumulation of wealth. King Puranjana was overly attached to his family and conceptions of I and mine. Because he was overly attracted to his wife, intelligence, he was already quite poverty-stricken. At the time of separation, he became very sorry. King Puranjana was anxiously thinking, "Alas, my wife is encumbered by so many children. When I pass from this body, how will she be able to maintain all these family members? Alas, she will be greatly harassed by thoughts of family maintenance." King Puranjana then began to think of his past dealings with his wife. He recalled that his wife would not take her dinner until he had finished his, that she would not take her bath until he had finished his, and that she was always very much attached to him, so much so that if he would sometimes become angry and chastise her, she would simply remain silent and tolerate his misbehavior. For family life, it is very good for a husband to be attached to his wife, but it is not good for spiritual advancement. Thus, Krishna consciousness must be established in every home. If a husband and wife are very much attached to one another in Krishna consciousness, they will both benefit because Krishna is the center of their existence. Otherwise, if the husband is too much attached to his wife, becomes a woman in his next life. The woman, being overly attached to her husband, becomes a man in her next life. Of course, it is an advantage for a woman to become a man, but it is not at all advantageous for the man to become a woman. Hare Krishna. King Purāṇa continued thinking how, when he was in a state of bewilderment, his wife would give him good counsel, and how she would become aggrieved when he was away from home. Although she was the mother of so many sons and heroes, the king still feared that she would not be able to maintain the responsibility of household affairs. King Purāṇa continued worrying. After I pass from this world, how will my sons and daughters who are now fully dependent on me live and continue their lives? Their position will be similar to that of passengers aboard a ship wrecked in the midst of the ocean. Although King Purāṇa should not have lamented over the fate of his wife and children, he nonetheless did, due to his miserly intelligence. In the meantime, Yavanaraj, whose name was fear itself, immediately drew near to arrest him. Purport Prabhupada explains, foolish people do not know that every individual soul is responsible for his own actions and reactions in life. As long as a living entity in the form of a child or boy is innocent, it is the duty of the father and mother to lead him in a proper understanding of the values of life. When a child is grown, it should be left up to him to execute the duties of life properly. A father may leave some estate for his children's immediate help, but he should not be overly absorbed in thoughts of how his family will survive after his death. When the Yavanas were taking King Purāṇa away to their place, binding him like an animal, the king's followers became greatly aggrieved. While they lamented, they were forced to go along with him. Prabhupada's explanation, when Yamaraj and his assistants take a living entity away to the place of judgment, the life air, and desires, being followers of the living entity, also go with him. This is interesting. It's confirmed in the Vedas. Prabhupada quotes here, when the living entity is taken away or arrested by Yamaraj, tam ukramantam, the life air also goes with him, prananut kramati. And when the life air is gone, pranam anutkramantam, all the senses, sarve prana, also go along, anutkramanti. When the living entity and the life air are gone, the lump of matter produced of 5 elements, earth, water, air, fire, and ether, is rejected and left behind. The living entity then goes to the court of judgment, and Yamaraj decides what kind of body he's going to get next. This process is unknown to modern scientists. Every living entity is responsible for his actions in this life, and after death he is taken to the court of Yamaraj, where it is decided what kind of body he will take next. Although the gross material body is left, the living entity and his desires, as well as the resultant reactions of his past activities, go on. It is Yamaraj who decides what kind of body one gets next in accordance with one's past actions. Next verse. The serpent, who had already been arrested by the soldiers of Yavanaraj and was out of the city, began to follow his master along with the others. As soon as they all left the city, it was immediately dismantled and smashed to dust. When King Purāṇa was being dragged with great force by the powerful Yavana, out of his gross ignorance, he still could not remember his friend and well-wisher, the Supersoul. So he's being dragged by fear. That fear, he's actually blinded by that fear. And he cannot remember the Supersoul within our heart, who is always there and can give shelter to the living entities, so they don't have to undergo these kinds of being dragged by fear. One who surrenders to the Supersoul, and the Supersoul's representative. The Supersoul is within the heart, and also those that have realization of their relationship with Krishna. They're there externally also, the advanced souls, the purified souls. So internally and externally, the reminders are there. But being dragged by fear and too overly attached to the material situation, so-called friends, family, body, wealth, whatever, blinded by those things. So blinded by fear. Hey, wow. Fear comes from ignorance, so ignorant of the Supersoul, and fear dominates. That most unkind king, Purāṇa, had killed many animals in various sacrifices. Now, taking advantage of this opportunity, all these animals began to pierce him with their horns. It was as though he were being cut to pieces by axes. Okay, Prabhupada speaks about this. He says, although in actuality no living entity is killed, the pains of being pierced by the horns of animals will be experienced after death. Just as in civilized human society, the law is a life for a life, no living entity can encroach upon another living entity as far as the Supreme Lord is concerned. Everyone should be given freedom to live at the cost of the Supreme Father, and animal killing, either for religion or for food, is always condemned by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Due to his contaminated association with women, a living entity like King Purāṇa eternally suffers all the pangs of material existence and remains in the dark region of material life, bereft of all remembrance for many, many years. Prabhupada. Material existence is experienced when one becomes attached to a woman and forgets his real identity as the eternal servant of Krishna. There's a song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he expresses this in his song. He says, because of my past fruitive activities, I have now fallen into an ocean of nations. I cannot find any means to get out of this great ocean, which is indeed like an ocean of poison. We're trying to be happy through sense enjoyment, but actually that so-called enjoyment is like food that is too hot, it causes burning in the heart. I feel a burning sensation constantly, day and night, and thus my mind cannot find satisfaction. Next verse. King Purāṇa gave up his body while remembering his wife. And consequently, in his next life, he became a very beautiful and well-situated woman. He took his next birth as the daughter of King Vidarbha in the very house of the king. Since King Purāṇa thought of his wife at the time of death, he attained the body of a woman in his next birth. This verifies the verse in Gita, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam jante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kanteya sadad tad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. It was fixed that Vaidarbhi, the daughter of King Vidarbha, was to be married to a very powerful man, Malayadvaja, an inhabitant of the Pandu country. After conquering other princes, he married the daughter of King Vidarbha. So, this is still allegory because King Purāṇa was a fictional character that embodies a situation that many people, it's like it illustrates the situation for conditioned souls. So, in the same way, Vidarbhi is also still, these aren't historical, this isn't a historical character. This is a story, an allegory. Lord Jesus also spoke in allegories. It helps to illustrate situation. So, Prabhupada explains that Malayadvaja, the king who married the Vidarbhi, was a great devotee. And his name, Malayadvaja, signifies a devotee who stands firm as Malaya Hill. And through his propaganda, makes other devotees similarly as firm. With his devotional flag unfurled, he stands fast to conquer other conceptions of transcendental realization. When there's an argument between a devotee and a non-devotee, a pure, strong devotee comes out victorious. So that was King Malayadvaja. And the country that he was from, or that he was king over, is the Pandu country, or Pandya, which comes from the word panda, meaning knowledge. So, unless one is highly learned, he cannot conquer non-devotional concepts. Now that learning is not necessarily like a professor would learn. That learning comes from realization and from hearing from realized souls. Study of the scripture, hearing the messages of Godhead. So unless one is highly learned, which means advanced in devotional service, he cannot conquer non-devotional concepts. So to break the word down, para means transcendental and pura means city. So parapura is Vaikuntha, the kingdom of God, and the word Jaya refers to one who can conquer. So this is great good fortune for this soul who was first a kind of degraded person, attached to sense gratification, family, as all in all, with no, and then overcome by fear, the time of death. But now somehow or other, although he's had to take birth as a woman, he has good fortune because now he has the association and the protection of a great devotee. So this is Narada explaining to King Prachunnabharisat how King Prachunnabharisat, who's hearing this story, can get some relief. Because right now, he's a lot like King Purāṇa. So there's a little bit of prophecy in here too. Try and help Prachunnabharisat out a little bit. Maybe he won't have to go through taking birth again, so on. Maybe he can just make that connection with the devotee now. Why go through the whole thing? But as the story, this allegory progresses, so this devotee kindly married the daughter of King Vidarbha. King Malayadvaja fathered one daughter who had very black eyes. He also had 7 sons who later became rulers of the tract of land known as Dravida. Thus there were 7 kings in that land. So figuratively, this means that the daughter of King Malayadvaja was also bestowed with devotional service, for her eyes were always fixed on Krishna. They're saying had very black eyes. So this is a lot of symbolism here. So there's black eyes. They were always fixed on Krishna. They were reflecting Krishna's blackness, dark like a rain cloud. A devotee has no vision in his life other than Krishna. And then the 7 sons are the 7 processes of devotional service. Hearing, chanting, remembering, offering worship, offering prayers, rendering transcendental loving service, and serving the lotus feet of the Lord. An interesting note here says, of the 9 types of devotional service, only 7 were immediately given. The remaining 2, friendship and surrendering everything, were developed later. In other words, devotional service is divided into 2 categories: Vaidhi Marg and Raga Marg. The process of becoming friends with the Lord and sacrificing everything belongs to the category of Raga Marg, the stage of devotional service, the developed stage of devotional service. For the neophyte, the important processes are those of hearing and chanting, Shravana Kirtanam, remembering Krishna, worshiping the deity in the temple, offering prayers, and always engaging in the service of the Lord, and worshiping the lotus feet of the Lord. This is a very interesting section. So, Vaidhi Marg and Raga Marg. Making friends with the Lord and offering everything to the Lord come later on a spontaneous platform. The word Yavishyasa indicates that these processes are very powerful. After a devotee engages in the processes of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, that's the original 7 that were listed, or Vaidhi-marg, and is able to secure these processes, he later can become a devotee capable of rendering spontaneous devotional service, namely Sakyam and Atmanivedanam. Generally, the great acharyas who preach devotional service all over the world belong to the category of Sakyam Atmanivedanam. Those are the preachers. They're on the spontaneous level. They're on the Raga marg, the actual preachers who can spread the movement. They have to be on that Raga marg, that spontaneous platform. A neophyte devotee cannot actually become a preacher. The neophyte is advised to execute devotional service in the 7 other fields, Shravanam, Kirtan, etc. If one can successfully execute the preliminary 7 items, he can, in the future, be situated on the platform of Sakyam Atmanivedanam. Sakyam Atmanivedanam. Hare Krishna. So, how does one go from the Vaidhi Bhakti to the Vaidhi marg to the Raga marg? Well, the process that's being given here is, Prabhupada is explaining that once one secures the first 7 devotional practices, then they're in a good position to get the other 2 and go to the final stages of development of love of God, spontaneous love for Krishna, loving devotional service for Krishna, become friends with the Lord, enter into a personal relationship with the Lord, and surrender everything, which means no material attachments whatsoever, and whatever one has in their possession is used in the service of the Lord, in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada doesn't say here how that happens. He says the devotee is in a good position. It happens by the causeless mercy of the Lord. When the Lord is pleased by the devotee's desire and loving attitude to go further into actually personal relationship with the Lord, loving mood, the Lord helps from within and from without. Just like the Lord helped bring the living entity into the original practices of Vaidhi marg. How did the Lord do that? He sent his representative. The Guru is there to teach the path of Vaidhi marg. The person doesn't come up with it on their own. Krishna sends the representative to show them how. So once that stage is reached and that level is maintained of what's given by Krishna's representative for the Vaidhi marg, then Krishna sends another representative. Same Krishna, just another servant to bring that devotee to the next level of Raga marg. Spontaneous love. That's how the devotee progresses, by Krishna's mercy. And Krishna's mercy is personified, because Krishna is a person. Krishna's mercy is in the form of his authorized, bona fide, qualified representative. It's interesting to find this in this section. This is a real jewel here. I'm going to make a little note. This is a real jewel. It's like a little, just like the Gita is set in the Mahabharata, which is umpteen thousands of verses long. And it's very exciting and very absorbing. And there's lessons everywhere along the way. It's very beautiful and colorful because it's about Krishna and Krishna's devotees. But set within it is, in comparison to the whole Mahabharata, the set within it is a very small little section, which is the Bhagavad Gita, which is this priceless jewel. So this little section here, like a little priceless jewel here. Okay, next verse. Actually, I don't want to make this video too long. Easier to deal with in shorter little sections. So I think we'll end here. That's on a pretty high note too. So once you get a taste, you just want more. I've heard it said that there's greed involved in spiritual life, and that this greed is, well, you're getting some. You want more? Yes, I want more. Are you ever satisfied? No. You just want more. So there's some greed is a good thing. And glories to the spiritual masters.